It was a peaceful evening, and the house felt quieter than usual. I had taken my standard dose of sleeping pills, the kind that helped me unwind after long, exhausting days. With the lights dimmed, I slowly walked to my bedroom, feeling the medication begin to take effect. I didn't know what the night had in store for me, but I couldn't have foreseen what was about to happen. As I settled under the soft covers, my mind released the day's worries, and I drifted into a deep, calm sleep. However, unknown to me, something unusual was happening in the house. Earlier in the evening, my stepson and 2 of his friends had come over. They were older teenagers, separated by just a few years, and frequently spent time together here. They often laughed, joked, and sometimes were a bit too noisy for my liking, but I didn't think much of it. They were just kids having fun. I trusted my stepson. He had always been respectful, though he was maturing quickly and becoming more independent. What I didn't know was that this night would be different for them. As I fell deeper into sleep, the strong effects of the sleeping pills taking over, the 3 boys were downstairs speaking in low voices. Something was happening, something I could never have imagined. They had been drinking, and their conversation had shifted into dangerous territory. My stepson, emboldened by alcohol, proposed something daring and reckless, and his friends, caught up in the energy, were eager to join him. As the clock struck midnight, the house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. I remained entirely unaware of the events unfolding just outside my bedroom door, as the boys devised a plan that would change everything. Even as I lay in my bed, completely still in a heavy sleep, I faintly felt something, or someone, near me, though my mind couldn't process it. The pills weighed me down so much that I couldn't react. A door opened slowly with a quiet creak, but my eyes remained closed, the sound distant as though it were part of a dream. The boys entered the room cautiously, with my stepson leading the way while his friends followed, glancing at each other nervously. This was entirely new to them, and though there was hesitation, a strange energy seemed to compel them forward. The faint glow from the streetlights outside filtered through the blinds, dimly lighting the room. I was lying on my back, my breathing steady and deep in sleep, entirely oblivious to their presence. My stepson approached, his heart pounding as though it might burst from his chest. This was something he had thought about before, but now that the moment had arrived, it felt unreal. His friends stood nearby, whispering among themselves in nervous excitement, encouraged by the alcohol's influence. Each of them knew that what they were doing couldn't be undone, and the weight of that realization hung over them. My stepson hesitated, his hand trembling slightly as he reached out to touch my arm. His touch was light, almost imperceptible, and I didn't wake. The sleeping pills ensured I stayed in a deep, dreamless sleep, but in that fleeting moment, everything shifted. The other boys stepped closer, their eyes wide as they observed him. It was like they were watching a scene from a film, something surreal and detached from reality, yet it was undeniably real. They were caught up in the adrenaline of doing something forbidden, something they instinctively knew they shouldn't be doing. My stepson leaned over and whispered something to his friends, who responded with nods, their nervousness still evident as they moved to either side of the bed. One of them glanced at my face, checking if I was still asleep. I didn't stir, completely lost in my heavy slumber. What happened next was a whirlwind of sensations and emotions none of us could have anticipated. My unresponsive body became their focus as they, caught up in the intoxication of the moment, allowed themselves to act on their impulses. Time seemed to stretch and distort as they carried out a plan they had once joked about, but never thought they'd actually follow through on. Yet, here they were, fully immersed in the moment, pushing boundaries they had never crossed before. What began with hesitation gave way to boldness, their actions fueled by the thrill of doing something forbidden. The line between right and wrong became blurred, and their concern for consequences faded away as they went further. One of the boys, the quieter one, began to feel a pang of guilt. Looking at me lying there so peacefully, a wave of doubt washed over him. He hadn't expected to feel this way, but now, in the middle of it all, he wasn't sure he could go through with it. He nudged my stepson, whispering that they should stop, that maybe this wasn't a good idea after all. My stepson, however, was too caught up in the moment to listen. Shrugging off his friend's concerns, he pushed forward, determined to see it through. The third boy, trapped between his own desires and the tension in the room, hesitated. He wanted to continue but could feel the growing unease. The air felt thick, like a ticking time bomb, and he wasn't sure how long it would be before something went wrong. Just as they were about to take things even further, I moved slightly. It was a small motion, barely noticeable, but it sent a wave of panic through the room. My stepson froze, his heart pounding as he stared at me. Though I hadn't woken, the slight movement of my body was enough to bring everything to a halt. The room fell into complete silence, the tension so thick it was nearly tangible. They all held their breath, waiting to see if I would wake, but the sleeping pills still kept their hold on me, and I stayed in my deep, oblivious slumber. Relieved but visibly shaken, they backed away, their excitement now laced with fear. What had begun as an exhilarating, reckless idea had spiraled completely out of control. My stepson looked at his friends, his expression hard to read. They had crossed a line, and every one of them knew it. Finally, one of the boys, the same one who had hesitated earlier, spoke up, voicing what they were all thinking. "We should stop. This isn't right." Though his tone was soft, his words hung heavy in the air, like a weight. My stepson hesitated, his thoughts racing. He knew his friend was right, but another part of him didn't want to stop. The adrenaline, the thrill, it was intoxicating. Yet deep within, he recognized they had gone too far. He glanced back at me, still asleep, and something shifted inside him. Slowly and reluctantly he nodded. They had to stop. This wasn't how things were supposed to happen. The thrill had vanished, replaced by guilt and regret. They had pushed too far, and there was no undoing what had already been done. Without speaking, they quietly exited the room, their footsteps barely audible as they retreated to the living room. The house returned to its quiet stillness, and I remained entirely unaware of what had just transpired. As the boys sat in the living room, the reality of their actions sank in. None of them said a word, the silence between them heavy with things left unsaid. My stepson stared at the floor, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't control. What had they been thinking? How had it come to this? His friends sat nearby, each lost in their own uneasy thoughts. The excitement and thrill of the moment were long gone, leaving behind only an oppressive sense of discomfort. They all knew they had crossed a line, and now they had to live with the consequences. When morning came, I awoke feeling groggy, the effects of the sleeping pills still lingering. I had no idea what had taken place during the night, no clue that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. To me, it was just another restful night. But for my stepson and his friends, everything had changed. The weight of their actions hung over them, a constant reminder of the night they had nearly gone too far. They tried to act normal, pretending nothing had happened, but the tension between them was impossible to miss. As the days passed, the memory of that night stayed with them, a secret they couldn't escape. In the following days, a noticeable, uneasy silence developed between my stepson and his two friends. They visited less often, and their usual loud laughter and playful behavior were replaced with awkward glances and strained conversations. I observed the change but didn't question it. I assumed it was just a phase. Teenagers often behaved unpredictably for reasons I couldn't always understand. What I didn't realize was the internal battle they were each struggling with. My stepson, in particular, seemed to avoid me more than usual. The guilt ate at him every time he saw me, and his friends were no different. They had once shared a bond filled with fun and mischief, but now it was clouded by something far darker. The tension between them was almost tangible. One afternoon, while cleaning the house, I came across an old photograph of my stepson and his friends. In the picture, they were younger, carefree and full of life. Seeing it reminded me of how much things had changed. At the time, I didn't understand the significance of the shift, but I could sense that something wasn't right. My stepson seemed distant, more so than usual, and his friends rarely visited. When they did, they appeared uneasy, as if they were walking on eggshells around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened, something they weren't telling me. Still, I brushed it off, reasoning that they were just growing up and finding their own paths. I trusted my stepson, even if his behavior had become unusual. But deep down, I couldn't help wondering if I had missed something important. Weeks went by, and I started noticing subtle changes in my stepson's behavior. He spent more time alone, avoided eye contact during our conversations, and seemed generally withdrawn. His friends also seemed different. One of them, the quieter one, especially appeared troubled. Every time he looked at me, guilt was written across his face. It seemed as if he wanted to tell me something, but held back, too scared of the consequences. One night, unable to sleep, I lay awake, my mind racing with fragmented thoughts I couldn't quite piece together. I felt an inexplicable unease, as if something was wrong, though I couldn't identify what it was. I replayed the events of the past few weeks in my mind, searching for the moment things had started to feel off. Then, it dawned on me. The night I had taken the sleeping pills. That night had seemed routine, or so I thought, but the way my stepson and his friends had acted since then made me wonder if something might have happened while I was asleep. At first, the idea seemed absurd, but the more I dwelled on it, the more the thought gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something significant. My instincts told me that whatever had changed between my stepson and his friends had begun that night. But how could I confirm it? None of them had said a word to me, yet their behavior spoke volumes. The next day, I decided to confront my stepson. It wasn't easy. I didn't know how to approach the subject without sounding paranoid, but I couldn't ignore the persistent suspicion that something had happened that night, something I needed to uncover. One evening, while we were alone in the kitchen, I finally brought it up. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He looked up from his phone, startled, as if he hadn't expected the question. "Yeah, why?" he replied, quickly, too quickly. "You've been acting different lately," I said, doing my best to keep my tone casual. "Is something going on with you and your friends?" I asked. For a moment he froze, staring at me with wide eyes like a deer caught in headlights. Then, just as quickly, he looked away, avoiding eye contact. "No, everything's fine," he muttered, but the tremble in his voice betrayed him. I chose not to push further, not yet. I could tell there was more to the story, but I decided to wait, hoping that he would eventually feel ready to tell me the truth. Over the following days, I paid close attention to him and his friends, watching for any clues about what had happened. My stepson remained withdrawn, and his friends visited the house less and less. It was clear that something was weighing on them, and I was determined to uncover what it was. Then, one evening, everything changed. It was late, and I was in the living room casually flipping through a magazine when I heard a knock at the door. Standing there was one of my stepson's friends, the quiet one, the one who always seemed the most uncomfortable around me. He looked pale, his hands trembling as he stood on the doorstep. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I nodded and stepped aside to let him in. He sat on the couch, his head in his hands, clearly struggling with something. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice shaking. "About that night when you took the sleeping pills." My heart began to race as I sat down across from him. I had sensed that something was wrong, but hearing him say it confirmed my worst fears. "What happened?" I asked, barely managing to keep my voice steady. Taking a deep breath, his hands still trembling, he began to explain. We did something we shouldn't have," he confessed. He described how they had come into my room that night, how my stepson had led the way, and how they had allowed themselves to get caught up in something they couldn't control. His voice was heavy with regret, and guilt was etched across his face. "I didn't want to go along with it," he said, tears filling his eyes, "but I didn't know how to stop it." As he spoke, a torrent of emotions overwhelmed me. Shock, anger, and disbelief. I could hardly process what I was hearing. My stepson, the boy I had trusted and cared for, had betrayed me in a way I couldn't have imagined. When he finished speaking, silence filled the room. I was at a loss for words, unsure of how to react. The walls seemed to close in around me like a heavy blanket. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to make it right." I sat there, stunned, trying to absorb everything he had just told me. My mind raced, a knot of anger tightening in my chest. But amidst the storm of emotions, I also felt a strange sense of relief. Relief that I finally knew the truth, that I hadn't been imagining things. After what felt like an eternity, I stood up. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. He nodded, wiping away tears as he got up and left the house. I watched him walk away, my heart pounding as I tried to figure out what to do next. The truth was out, but it left me shattered. I couldn't look at my stepson the same way anymore. Everything had changed, and I had no idea how to move forward. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. The weight of what I had learned felt suffocating, and my mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, and confusion. I had trusted my stepson completely, and he had broken that trust in the most devastating way. The next morning I confronted him. I told him what his friend had revealed. At first he denied it, but eventually the guilt became too much and he broke down, confessing everything. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know why we did it." I couldn't find the words to respond. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive him. The bond of trust between us was shattered and I didn't know if it could ever be mended. In the end, I made the difficult decision to send him away, to give myself the space I needed to heal. It was one of the hardest choices I had ever faced, but I knew it was the right one. As time passed, I tried to move on, but the memory of that night remained. It became a scar that would never fully heal, a constant reminder of the betrayal I had endured. However, I also learned something valuable, that even when the people you trust the most hurt you in unimaginable ways, you can find the strength to move forward. Though the pain never completely disappeared, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, but over time I rediscovered myself, and in the end, that was all I could do. If you enjoy stories like this, stay tuned. There are more gripping tales to come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.